Ranger, stop. You're hurting her. The scream shattered the calm of a sleepy Saturday morning. Cereal spilled across the tile floor. A mug of coffee dropped and burst like a thunderclap. And in the hallway of a quiet Vermont farmhouse, 5-year-old Lila Monroe shrieked in terror as her German Shepherd Ranger dragged her backwards by the collar of her pajama shirt. The dog wasn't growling, wasn't snapping, but his eyes were wide with something far worse than anger. Panic! Ranger, her father, Ethan Monroe, shouted, lunging into the hallway, barefoot glass crunching under his heel. Release, let her go! But Ranger didn't move. He kept pulling, muscles taut, eyes locked, not on Lila, but on the dark closed door just feet away. The basement door. It was the third time that week. Only this time he looked absolutely terrified. 6 hours earlier, everything had felt like any other spring morning in Tamarack Hollow. A tight-knit town where people still left their doors unlocked and the diner served pie with every coffee refill. Ethan had been standing in the kitchen, savoring a few moments of calm. The kids next door were already outside with sidewalk chalk. The sound of bird song drifted in through the screen door. Maya, his wife, was still asleep upstairs, and Lila was quietly building Lego castles in the living room while Ranger lay near her feet. The dog had been acting different lately. Not aggressive, not sick, just on edge. He'd started sleeping in front of the basement door every night, refused to eat unless the door was latched shut, and twice he'd whined and circled Lila anytime she walked near the stairs like he was trying to herd her away. Ethan had shrugged it off. Maybe there were mice down there. Or maybe Ranger had caught the scent of something that triggered a memory. The house was old, built in the 1940s, full of creaks and quirks. But this morning when he saw his 80-pound shepherd dragging his daughter away from that door, like a trained tactical dog pulling someone from a bomb threat, he stopped making excuses. Lila sobbed into his arms as Ranger released her and backed up whining, standing between them and the door like a bodyguard. The dog wasn't shaking, but every hair on his back stood rigid. His ears were up, eyes locked on the crack under the door. Ethan stared too. The air smelled odd, a faintly sweet scent, almost like paint thinner, but the basement had been locked for months. He hadn't started renovations yet. There was nothing down there except old Christmas lights, exercise gear Maya had given up on, and a decommissioned water heater. Are you okay, baby? Ethan whispered, crouching to check Lila for bruises. She nodded wide-eyed. He didn't bite me. He was trying to pull me away. Ranger whined again, sharp, almost pleading. That's when Maya appeared in the hallway, bleary-eyed in an old college hoodie. What happened? Ethan looked up. I think the dog just saved our daughter from something in the basement. They all sat around the kitchen table an hour later. Lila now coloring calmly with a juice box. Maya tapping through pet forums on her iPad. Ethan pouring a second cup of coffee and glancing nervously at the basement door. Ranger lay facing it, wide awake, ears twitching. Listen to this, Maya said, adjusting her glasses. If your dog is fixated on a part of your home, refusing access or showing protective behavior, don't ignore it. Especially if the dog has working or scent detection training. They may be alerting to something humans can't perceive. Ethan rubbed the bridge of his nose. So what? You think there's a ghost in the basement? No, Maya said slowly, but I think there's something down there. Something he knows is dangerous. Maybe it's a gas leak, he muttered. Then why don't we smell it? He opened his mouth to argue, then paused. The air had smelled off earlier. But it was faint, so faint it could have been anything. Maya didn't press further. Instead, she turned her iPad to face him. Did you know that scent detection dogs can identify parts per trillion? That's thousands of times more sensitive than human noses. Even low-level gas leaks. Some dogs have even been trained to detect cancer. Ethan sipped his coffee and looked at Ranger, now watching Lila like a lifeguard at a crowded pool. If you believe dogs can sense things we can't and love true animal hero stories, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Heroes for Animals. Tap the bell so you never miss a life-saving bark. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Ethan tossed and turned, dreams flickering between childhood memories of war zones and Ranger's desperate eyes. At 2:34 a.m., he woke to the sound of claws tapping across hardwood. Ranger. The dog had left Lila's bedroom and now stood rigid beside Ethan and Maya's bed, staring silently at the bedroom door. Not growling, not whining, just listening, Ranger Ethan whispered. The dog didn't look at him. Instead, his nostrils flared. What is it, boy? Maya stirred. Is he pointing again? Ethan sat up. The hallway was dark, but something made him get out of bed. He grabbed the flashlight from his nightstand. Ranger followed without a sound. At the basement door, the air was cooler, still, and that faint, sweet smell was back stronger now. He pressed his palm to the door. Warm. That wasn't right. Tomorrow, he said aloud, turning to Ranger. First thing, I'm going down there. But Lila and Maya go to her mom's while I do. Ranger whined softly, then laid down against the door again. The next morning dawned golden and quiet, birds flitting across the early sun as Maya buckled Lila into her car seat. Call me the second you find anything, she said, kissing Ethan's cheek. It's probably just a busted pipe, he said, voice hollow. But something told him it wasn't. Not just because of the smell, not just because of Ranger. Because his daughter, the one who played with Ranger every day, like his sister, had said something the night before that froze him in place. She had whispered, Daddy Ranger says there's a man in the basement, and he can't breathe. Ethan Monroe stood in front of the basement door with his flashlight, toolbox, and a knot in his stomach he hadn't felt since Afghanistan. Ranger was beside him, silent but alert. The German Shepherd hadn't moved from the door since Maya and Lila left for her mother's house 30 minutes ago. The minute their car pulled out of the driveway, Ranger had risen to his feet, ears perked, tail still. All right, buddy, Ethan muttered. Let's see what's got you so worked up. The flashlight beam trembled slightly as Ethan twisted the old brass doorknob. The door creaked open. A wave of cold air washed over them. Ranger's nostrils flared. A low sound, not a growl, not a whimper, but something deep and anxious rose from his throat. Still, he followed Ethan down the creaky stairs, step by cautious step. The basement hadn't changed since they moved in 6 months ago. Exposed beams, cement floor, 2 narrow windows, barely letting in daylight. Stacks of storage bins, unused dumbbells, and a sagging old couch. Nothing looked out of place, but something felt wrong. Stay close, Ethan told Ranger, even though the dog never left his side. He began scanning the basement, methodically sweeping from left to right with his flashlight. Water heater, storage shelves, no obvious leaks, no scorch marks, no pests. But then Ranger did something Ethan hadn't seen before. He walked directly to the far corner behind the water heater and started sniffing a section of drywall with sharp intensity. You smell something, Ethan asked. The dog scratched twice at the wall and looked back at him. Ethan crouched beside the wall. At first glance, it looked newer, less scuffed than the surrounding area. He touched the surface. It felt warm, warmer than it should have been. He knocked on it. The sound was wrong, hollow. What the hell? He set the flashlight down, grabbed his utility knife from the toolbox, and cut a small square out of the drywall. A sickly sweet chemical smell hit him immediately. Not overpowering, but unmistakable. Behind the drywall was a gas pipe, and it was cracked. Jesus. Ethan stumbled back, pulling out his phone. He didn't even wait to think. He dialed the gas company's emergency line, his heart racing. Within 30 minutes, 2 utility trucks were outside their home. Technicians in safety gear were down in the basement, with Ethan examining the leak. You're lucky, one of them said, adjusting his mask. This wasn't just a minor leak. This thing's been bleeding gas for weeks. Probably months. Ethan stared at the technician, dumbfounded. If the concentration had built up just a bit more. The man shook his head. One spark. A light switch. Static electricity. Your whole house could have gone up. Ethan sank onto the basement stairs, suddenly lightheaded. How the hell did you know? The tech asked. I didn't, Ethan said, rubbing his face. My dog did. That night, the Monroes sat on the back porch in stunned silence. Ranger lay at Ethan's feet, breathing evenly for the first time in weeks. His body no longer tense, his eyes calm. Lila was asleep upstairs, curled beside Maya, unaware of how close they'd come to disaster. I did some digging, Maya said, holding her tablet close. About Ranger. Ethan turned his head slightly. You remember the shelter we got him from in upstate New York? Yeah, that little place near Glens Falls. They didn't tell us much, right? Just that he was surrendered after his owner died. Well, I called them. I asked if they had any records they hadn't shared with us. Ethan sat up straighter. The director called me back personally, Maya said, her voice low. Ranger isn't even his real name. His microchip was registered under a different one. What name? Diesel. Ethan blinked. He belonged to a man named Benjamin Calder, a mine safety foreman from West Virginia. Maya turned the tablet toward Ethan. A scanned form from the original intake file appeared. Attached was a blurry black and white photo of a younger, thinner Diesel, same intelligent eyes, but a haunted look behind them. He wasn't just someone's pet, Maya continued. Diesel was trained, specially trained. Calder used him to detect gas leaks in old mines. Said he could pick up smells their equipment couldn't. Ethan looked down at Ranger. The dog stared back, silent, steady. There's more, Maya said. After Benjamin died in a mine collapse, Diesel was found by his body, wouldn't leave his side. The EMTs had to sedate him to get him out of the ambulance. A chill ran down Ethan's arms despite the summer night. They tried to rehome him with the foreman's sister, Maya added, but she couldn't keep him, so he ended up in the shelter. That's when we found him. Ethan exhaled slowly. So you're telling me this dog saved us because he's done it before? They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Ethan leaned down, scratched behind Ranger's ears, and whispered, "Thank you, boy." The next morning, Lila skipped her cereal spoon across the kitchen table, staring at the TV. Ranger lay curled under her feet, tail occasionally thumping against the floor. "I had a weird dream," she said between bites. Maya looked up from her coffee. "Oh, there was a man in the basement. He couldn't breathe." Ethan and Maya exchanged a look. "What did he look like?" Maya asked gently. "I don't know. I couldn't see his face. But Ranger was there, and he was barking and barking, trying to tell me to go upstairs." Ethan reached for the newspaper, mostly to cover the fact that his hands were trembling slightly. "That's just a dream, sweetheart," Maya said softly. "Yeah," Lila replied, but Ranger knew he was there too. That evening, the Monroes hosted the neighborhood potluck, a monthly tradition in Tamarack Hollow. It was a chance to unwind, gossip, and let the kids run wild while paper plates sagged under casserole and coleslaw. Ethan grilled burgers while Maya refilled lemonade pitchers. Ranger stayed unusually close to the back porch door, eyes tracking Lila's every move. "Dog seems on edge," said Gary Holt, their neighbor and retired plumber. "Everything okay with him?" "Been a weird week," Ethan admitted, handing him a burger. "He's been freaking out over the basement. Wouldn't let Lila near it." Gary raised an eyebrow. "Basement, huh? You know the previous owner did some odd stuff down there? Curtis Hayes, the guy who flipped this place. Yeah, cut corners all over the place. I offered to help with some plumbing. He didn't want me near it, said it was already taken care of." Ethan frowned. "He moved a wall or two, didn't he?" Gary nodded. "And put in a new water heater himself. No permits." Ethan's contractor brain went into overdrive. "You think he was hiding something?" "Wouldn't surprise me." Later that night, long after the guests had gone home, Ethan stood once again before the basement door. Ranger stood beside him, no longer whining, just waiting. "I fixed the leak," Ethan said aloud. "So why do you still look worried?" Ranger didn't move. Ethan opened the door. The stairs creaked under his weight. The air felt different, cleaner maybe, but the sensation in his chest told him something wasn't over. "Tomorrow," he said, "we're tearing this place apart. Whatever secrets this house has been hiding, it's time we found them." Ranger's tail gave a single thump of agreement, but his eyes never left the corner of the basement behind the water heater, where something somewhere still wasn't right. The morning sun was already cutting long golden beams through the blinds when Ethan Monroe pulled on his work boots and zipped up his canvas jacket. He stood in the kitchen sipping black coffee, eyes flicking between the clock and the basement door. Across the room, Ranger lay by the pantry, tail resting still on the floor. He hadn't touched his food that morning, hadn't blinked since Ethan poured his coffee. "You ready?" Ethan asked, setting the mug down. Ranger stood immediately. His eyes went to the basement door. Ethan grabbed his flashlight, pry-bar stud finder, and multi-tool. He'd torn apart 100 walls in his construction days, but never one in his own home under the guidance of a dog with trauma in his eyes. This wasn't normal. This was personal. As he stepped towards the door, Maya emerged from the hallway, still tying her hair back in a messy bun. Lila trailed behind her in mismatched socks. "We're heading out," Maya said, grabbing her keys. "Text me if anything feels off. And if you start feeling sick again, tight chest nausea, you stop. Immediately." "I will." Lila stepped close and looked up at Ranger. "Be careful, boy." The German Shepherd gave a faint tail wag, but didn't break his stare from the door. "You be good for your mom," Ethan told her. "We'll see what's got Ranger so fired up." By 9:30 a.m., the house was silent, except for the distant hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of shifting wood. Ethan stepped down into the basement, Ranger at his side. The space looked like every other unfinished basement in small-town America. Exposed ductwork, a water heater groaning in the corner, cardboard boxes, half collapsed under their own age. But as Ethan reached the far end past the treadmill Maya had never used, he stopped. Something didn't line up. The section of drywall near the water heater. It was just a little off, smoother, fresher, too clean for a house that had sat empty for 2 years before they bought it. Ranger moved to the wall, sniffed once, then pawed at the corner. "All right," Ethan muttered, setting his toolbox down. "Let's take a look." He knocked his knuckles along the drywall. Thud, thud, hollow. He ran the stud finder across the surface. The readings didn't match the rest of the wall. The beams were spaced oddly, and there was no sign of insulation. He scored a clean square with his utility knife and gently pulled back a panel. The smell hit him first, earthy, damp, tinged with metal. Behind the drywall wasn't a foundation wall, it was open space. Ethan grabbed his flashlight and peered through. Son of a room, or what used to be one. No wider than a closet, maybe 8 feet across. The walls were rough old stone. A dirt floor lay beneath, uneven and sloping. At first glance, it looked like a forgotten root cellar until he spotted the stained mattress in the far corner. And the notebooks. Ethan slid his mask up over his nose and broke away more drywall, enough to get through. He crouched, crawling into the space. The air was still stale and heavy. He scanned the walls with his flashlight. On a crate in the corner lay 4 notebooks, each one covered in small, jagged handwriting. Ethan flipped through the first one and his stomach twisted. Drawings of his house, floor plans, notes about their routines. When Maya left for school, when Lila watched cartoons, what time Ethan returned from jobs. He felt bile rise in his throat. Someone had been watching them, living down here, and studying them. He reached for his phone, hands trembling. Maya picked up on the second ring. I need you to take Lila somewhere else. Don't come home yet, not until I tell you it's safe. Ethan, what did you find? There's a hidden room in our basement, and it's not just some old storage space. Someone's been living here, watching us, taking notes. Silence. Call the sheriff, he added, right now. Deputy Connie Hayes showed up 35 minutes later with a flashlight and a pair of latex gloves. Her boots sank slightly into the damp dirt as she stepped into the hidden space. You ever seen anything like this before? Ethan asked, arms crossed. Not outside of true crime documentaries, she muttered. We'll need forensics. I'll get a team in here before nightfall. This is more than trespassing. Ethan gestured toward the notebooks. Do we know who used to own this place? Curtis Hayes, no relation to me. He bought it cheap during the 2008 crash. Did a bunch of shoddy reno work and flipped it. Fast, dirty. Sold it to another guy who defaulted during the pandemic. You're the 3rd owner in 15 years. Ethan felt a pulse in his temple. You think it was Curtis? I'm not sure yet, but this trapdoor is new. Ethan turned. Trapdoor. Connie crouched by the corner where the mattress sat. She scraped away a layer of loose dirt, revealing a small wooden panel with a shiny metal padlock. Ethan knelt beside her. That's a modern lock. Yep, installed within the last year, I'd bet. Ethan looked at Ranger, who now stood stiff beside them, ears forward, body trembling just slightly. Connie, he said, I need to know what's down there. Ethan, I'm not touching it until your team arrives. But I need to know. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. Even with Maya and Lila staying at her sister's house, the house felt too loud, too empty, too alive. Every creak of the wood, every groan of the pipes felt like breath in the walls. Ranger paced. Again and again, his nails clicked against the hardwood floor, circling the house, returning to the basement door, sitting. Waiting. Just past midnight, Ethan gave in. He grabbed a cold beer, sat on the basement stairs, and stared at the hidden entrance. You knew, he said aloud. Weeks before we did. You knew. Ranger sat next to him, his weight solid and warm, pressed against Ethan's knee. Ethan sipped the beer. Whoever lived down there, they weren't just squatting. They were planning something or watching for someone. He looked down at the dog. But you wouldn't let them hurt her. You knew she wasn't safe. Ranger let out a small, throaty sound, almost like a sigh. I'm going back in tomorrow, Ethan said. And we're opening that trap door together. The next day, Deputy Hayes returned with 2 forensic techs, a crime scene photographer, and backup. Maya and Lila stayed gone. Ethan gave a full statement, turned over the notebooks, and pointed them toward the cracked gas pipe. At 3:17 p.m., the padlock was cut. Ethan crouched beside the trapdoor, heart pounding in his ears. The hinges groaned. Below was a narrow shaft just wide enough for a man to fit through. The air that came up was damp, cold, touched with something faintly sour. I'm going down, Ethan said, grabbing his flashlight. Wait, Connie said, let me. No, if this is my house, my family, I need to know. Ranger stood beside him. Not this time, buddy, Ethan said. You stay. The dog let out a sharp bark. Ethan stopped. The bark wasn't aggressive. It was a warning. Ethan Monroe had crawled into plenty of crawl spaces, attics, and half-built foundations in his construction career. But never one like this. The shaft beneath the trap door was barely wider than his shoulders. The walls were rough stone. The rungs bolted into place looked ancient, and the damp air that rose up from below smelled like wet earth, and something much harder to name, something metallic, sour, and wrong. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness. The shaft ran straight down about 8 feet and then opened sideways into what looked like another small chamber. He hesitated. Behind him at the trapdoor's edge, Ranger let out a low bark, not a warning this time, but something sharper. Urgent. All right, I'm going, Ethan muttered, gripping the cold iron rungs. As he lowered himself, water dripped somewhere below, echoing eerily in the narrow shaft. The rungs were slick, but solid. He dropped 1 foot at a time, counting them. 5, 6, 7. He reached the bottom and stepped into the chamber. His boots sank half an inch into wet dirt. He swung the flashlight. The beam landed on a folding chair, a bucket, a pile of worn blankets shoved into the corner. And then, a figure, curled against the far wall, pale skin, bare arms, hair plastered to her cheeks. Alive, eyes wide. Jesus! Ethan breathed, rushing forward. Hey, I'm here to help. The woman flinched, scrambling backward until the chain around her ankle yanked her short with a metallic clink. Please don't hurt me, she whispered hoarsely. I'm not here to hurt you, Ethan said quickly. I swear to God, I'm getting you out of here. Her lips were cracked, her breathing shallow. Her hands clutched a heavy chain, wrapped tight around her ankle, bolted to a steel loop set in the concrete wall. Ethan dropped to his knees and shined the light on the lock. It was old, a padlock, simple, the kind you'd use on a storage unit or rusty toolbox. I'm gonna pick this all right, he said gently. Do you know how long you've been down here? 3 days, she rasped, I think. Maybe 4. He drugged me. Who? Curtis Hayes. He said he'd come back when it was time to move me again. Ethan's blood went cold. That name again. The man who used to own their house. You're safe now, he said. Just hang on. He worked the lock with his pocket screwdriver, fingers trembling. Heart pounding. Ranger barked from above again. I'm here, Ethan shouted. There's someone down here. Call 911. The woman's name was Jessica. She'd been working at a motel off Route 12 when Curtis approached her, posing as a contractor, looking to hire women for property management. Just temporary work, he'd said. Great pay. I just need help cleaning out some rentals. She climbed into his truck. Everything after that was a blur. By the time Ethan freed the chain and helped Jessica up the ladder, the basement above was filled with people. Deputy Hayes, 2 EMTs, a fire crew, and Ranger growling low at anyone who came too close. Jessica collapsed onto a stretcher. As they carried her toward the ambulance, she reached for Ethan's hand. You saved me, she whispered. But your dog, he found me, didn't he? Ethan nodded. Yeah, he always knew something was wrong. It should have ended there. Curtis caught. Jessica rescued. The house inspected, the walls opened, the danger removed. But it didn't, because the storm started that night, and with it came the flood. The rain pounded down in waves, rattling the porch windows like fistfuls of gravel. Maya and Lila had come home reluctantly only after the police gave the all clear. Jessica was resting in the hospital stable. Ranger had barely moved from the front door. Ethan was getting ready for bed when he heard a knock at the door. He opened it to find Curtis Hayes standing on his porch, soaked to the bone, eyes wild and a pistol in his hand. You took everything, Curtis hissed. Ethan didn't hesitate. He slammed the door. Call 911, he shouted to Maya. He's here. But Curtis kicked in the door before Maya could even reach her phone. The gun waved wildly. Back, all of you. Go upstairs. Maya grabbed Lila and scrambled. Ranger barked and lunged, but skidded across the wet floor as Curtis screamed, sit down. Ethan raised both hands. You don't have to do this. Curtis's voice cracked. They were going to kill me. I needed collateral. She was the price. Jessica's alive. She's talking. You're done, Hayes. Thunder cracked outside. Curtis turned the gun toward the stairs. Call them down. Right now. That's when Ranger moved. With the force and precision of a trained police dog, he launched from the shadows, teeth clamping down on Curtis's arm, just as the gun fired. The shot went wide, hitting the ceiling. Curtis screamed as Ranger pulled him down, biting, growling, refusing to let go. Ethan dove, grabbed the pistol, kicked it across the room. Deputy Hayes burst in seconds later, weapon drawn. Curtis Hayes was on the floor, blood pooling beneath his elbow, pinned beneath a German shepherd who had absolutely refused to let evil walk out of that house again. Curtis was arrested on the spot. Jessica's testimony, along with the evidence in the basement, would guarantee a long prison sentence. But the damage was done. And not just to the house, to Ethan. That night, he started coughing. By morning, he was short of breath. The ER confirmed what Maya feared: the water he'd inhaled in the crawl space had been filled with toxic mold and chemical runoff from the cracked gas line. His lungs were damaged, permanently. The doctor used the word scarring. Ethan would need medication, possibly oxygen therapy, a long recovery. Ranger waited at the hospital doors every day for a week. And every time Ethan didn't return, he got weaker. Stopped eating, started pacing, stopped pacing, started lying in front of the window unmoving, like he was waiting for another death. Just like before. 3 weeks later, when Ethan finally came home with a portable oxygen tank, a limp and hollowed cheeks, Ranger lifted his head. It was the first time he'd moved in 3 days. Lila gasped and dropped her juice box. He's wagging his tail. Maya dropped to her knees beside the dog. He sees you. Ethan wheeled himself over. Ranger dragged his body across the floor bones, more visible than ever, and rested his head in Ethan's lap. You thought I wasn't coming back, Ethan whispered. Ranger's eyes fluttered closed, his body relaxing for the first time since the rescue. You kept this family alive, Ethan said, voice cracking. Now let me keep you alive too. The vet came the next morning. She ran tests, gave fluids, took blood. He's not sick, she told Maya quietly. He's just shutting down. He thinks Ethan's dying. Dogs don't forget trauma, and this one's lived through it before. That night, Ethan wheeled himself beside Ranger's bed and refused to leave his side. He slept with his hand resting on Ranger's chest, and for the first time in days, the dog's breathing grew deeper. More even. As the sun began to rise, Ranger opened his Ranger opened his eyes and looked at Ethan. And this time he knew it wasn't over. It wasn't like last time. This story would end differently. Together, Ranger had moved just once that morning. He'd lifted his head, stared at Ethan for 10 full seconds, and then laid it gently back on the blanket. It wasn't much, but to Maya Monroe it was everything. She stood just outside the bedroom doorway, holding her breath like the moment might break if she so much as blinked. Down the hall, Lila's quiet voice filtered from the living room as she narrated a coloring page to herself. Ethan. Her husband sat propped up in bed beside their dog. He was pale thinner than she remembered from just a month ago, with the oxygen tank humming beside him and a blanket across his lap. His hand never left Ranger's head. He's still with us, Ethan said softly, not turning, but barely. The vet had called earlier that morning. Ranger's kidney function had dropped. His appetite was non-existent. His muscle tone was wasting. If he didn't start eating soon, they'd need to make a decision. He's waiting for something Ethan had told her last night. What Maya asked, to be sure I'm not going to die too. That evening, Maya took Lila to stay with her sister for the weekend. It wasn't an easy decision, but even Lila understood that something sacred was happening in that back bedroom. I think Ranger's heart is broken, she whispered before leaving. Can you tell him he's still our hero? Ethan promised he would. Then the house went quiet. No cartoons, no dishes clinking, no footsteps. Just two survivors, one man, one dog, bound together by something deeper than words. Ethan wheeled himself beside Ranger's bed. I know what you're doing, he whispered. You think this is the same story. You think I'm Bill Calder, and you're going to lose me the way you lost him. But you're wrong. Ranger didn't respond. Because you saved me. You saved Maya. You saved Lila. You even saved Jessica. Hell, you probably saved a dozen other women Curtis would have heard. And now it's time for me to save you. He shifted, reached for the old blue bandana folded beside the bed. Bill's bandana, the one Ranger had worn in the mines. He held it up to the dog's nose. You're not alone anymore, Ethan said. And this isn't West Virginia. This is home. He talked through the night. About everything and nothing. The time Lila snuck marshmallows into Ranger's crate. The way Maya pretended to hate dog hair, but always smiled when Ranger curled against her legs. He even talked about the future. We're going to build again. Not this old wreck, something better. Single floor, flat foundation. You'll like it? No stairs. He played voice recordings. Maya had saved Lila, reading bedtime stories, laughter from the kitchen, the click of Ranger's leash. Every time the dog stirred, Ethan pressed on. This time, the story ends with both of us walking out. By morning, something had shifted. Ranger drank a full bowl of water, then impossibly dragged himself 2 feet closer and laid his head in Ethan's lap. Maya walked in just as it happened. Oh my God, she whispered. Ethan didn't move. He's coming back. The vet called again that afternoon. Maya took the call on the front porch, while Ethan and Ranger dozed together inside. I don't know what you did, the vet said, but his numbers are better today. Not great, but better. She paused. Keep doing whatever you're doing. The recovery was slow. Day by day, Ranger's strength returned. First, he sat up on his own. Then he stood, walked, took a few bites of chicken. By the end of the week, he was sleeping at the foot of the bed instead of on the floor. And every morning when Ethan wheeled out of the bedroom, Ranger followed. Silent, watchful, steady, the way he always had. 2 weeks later, a plain white envelope arrived in the mailbox addressed to Ethan and Maya in clean looping handwriting. No return address. Inside was a single page. Jessica, she had left the hospital, moved back in with her aunt in Burlington. She was healing slowly, and she wanted them to know that their dog had changed everything. I never would have been found, she wrote, if it hadn't been for Ranger. I know what he did. I know what he felt. You saved him. But he saved me first. At the bottom of the letter was a photo. Jessica in a backyard chair, own sunlight in her hair, holding a small rescue dog in her lap. You inspired me, the note read, so I'm going to do something with the second chance he gave me. In the weeks that followed, word spread about the boy who uncovered a gas leak, exposed a hidden chamber, and saved a kidnapped woman. The sheriff gave Ranger a medal. The mayor invited them to a small ceremony at town hall. The local news ran a 3-minute piece with the headline, Vermont hero dog foils kidnapper saves entire family. Ethan hated the cameras. Ranger hated the bow tie, but Lila thought it was the best day of her life. He's like a real superhero, she whispered to her teacher the next morning, holding up a drawing of Ranger with a cape. But the biggest surprise came one afternoon when a car pulled into their driveway, a dusty old sedan with West Virginia plates. Out stepped a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a firm jawline that looked vaguely familiar. Maya met her on the porch. Can I help you? I'm looking for Ranger, the woman said gently, though I knew him as Diesel. Ethan stepped outside with the dog, who froze the moment he saw her. Then his tail wagged. Hard. You must be Eleanor, Ethan said, extending a hand. She shook it. My brother was Bill. I've got a few things that belong to him. Thought he might want them back. She reached into her tote and pulled out a weathered leather collar, a rubber ball chewed to near extinction, and a framed photo of Bill standing beside Diesel, both wearing hard hats. Ranger whined, then leaned into her, pressing his whole body against her knees. Oh, buddy, Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking. You made it. You really made it. They invited her to stay for dinner. Over mashed potatoes and grilled corn, Eleanor told stories about the mine, about how Bill trained Diesel himself using nothing but bacon grease and patience. Wouldn't trust any of that fancy equipment, she said. Said Diesel's nose was better than any detector they could make. Ethan smiled. He was right. I hated giving him up, she said, tearing up. But I couldn't take care of him after Bill died. It tore me up to surrender him. You didn't surrender him, Maya said gently. You gave him a second chance. And that chance saved all of us. That night after Eleanor left, Ethan sat on the porch with Ranger beside him, both watching the fireflies drift through the yard. I guess we both got rescued, he said softly. Ranger licked his hand once, then looked toward the stars. The house on Willow Creek Lane was quiet again. Too quiet sometimes. The emergency crews were long gone. The reporters had stopped calling, and the plywood boards covering the basement wall had finally been replaced with solid brick. It had taken weeks to gut the damage, inspect the wiring, and secure every inch of the foundation. Curtis Hayes had left more than trauma behind. He'd left scars in the very bones of the house. But now at last it was whole again. So was Ranger. Well, mostly. It took 2 months for Ethan to wean off the oxygen tank. His lungs were still tight in the mornings, and he had to take breaks more often than he liked. But he was walking again, real walking outside with Ranger trotting at his side. Lila called them the two wounded warriors. She'd drawn a picture of them in her school journal, Ranger, with a little red cape, Ethan with a scar on his cheek and a hero medal around his neck. It hung on the fridge with pride. One morning, just after Halloween, Maya walked out to find Ethan standing at the edge of the yard in flannel pajamas and work boots, staring at the sky. You know we can't keep living here forever, right? He said softly. She stepped up beside him, pulled her cardigan tighter against the breeze. Because of what happened. Because it's time. I don't want Lila to grow up in a house built on someone else's secrets. Maya didn't answer right away. Ranger, as if sensing the conversation, sat beside them, ears relaxed, watching a pair of squirrels bicker across the fence line. We'll find a new place, she said finally, but we take him with us. Obviously, Ethan smiled. That dog's not just part of the family, he is the family. By Thanksgiving, they'd found a small, single-story farmhouse outside of town. Flat land, good drainage, no basement. Ethan drew up the blueprints himself and poured the first concrete slab with his own hands. Every inch of the new place was designed with two things in mind: accessibility and peace of mind. The spare room was turned into Ranger's domain, padded floors, wide windows, and a bed big enough for a bear. Not that he used it much. He still preferred sleeping in Lila's room. And Lila, she no longer had nightmares. Around Christmas, Ethan got a phone call from a number he didn't recognize. "Is this Mr. Monroe?" the woman asked. "I'm calling from the State Canine Search and Rescue Division." He sat straighter. "Yes. We've heard about your dog, Ranger, his background, what he did for your family." Ethan braced. "You're not calling to take him away, are you?" She laughed. "No, sir. We're calling to ask if you'd be interested in bringing him in for volunteer certification." Volunteer. We've been expanding our community's scent work and disaster response units. His training is clearly extensive, and his bond with you, that's the foundation for everything we do. Ethan glanced across the yard where Ranger was lying in a patch of sunlight, head on his paws. "We're not sure how much longer he'll be able to work," Ethan said carefully. "He's older, slower now. Sometimes it's not about how fast they run. It's about how well they listen." Ranger passed his temperament and tracking tests in early January. The certification instructor, a grizzled Vietnam vet named Clyde, stood with his arms crossed as Ranger sniffed out a hidden object buried beneath a tarp, then led Ethan across a 3-acre training field with precision. "That dog still got it," Clyde grunted. "He's a natural." Ethan smiled. He always was. That afternoon, they handed Ranger an official search and rescue vest, forest green, with his name embroidered in yellow thread. Lila burst into tears when she saw it. By spring, Ranger had been placed on the community call list, a program where certified canines could be contacted for local searches, lost kids, hikers, even pets. He didn't respond to every call, but when he did, he worked like the old days. Focused, calm, like he was home again. Then one morning in early May, the call came. A little boy had gone missing in the woods behind Cedar Hill Elementary. 7 years old, autistic, nonverbal. The police had searched all night. Volunteers were combing the woods, but the area was massive miles of trees, creeks, old stone foundations. The family was desperate. Ethan looked at Ranger, who had been resting quietly under the kitchen table. "You up for it, partner?" Ranger stood without hesitation. They arrived just before noon. A sergeant briefed them by the trailhead. "We've got 2 search teams on the east side, but nothing yet. We found small footprints heading toward the south ridge. Kid might be hiding or hurt." Ethan clipped the leash to Ranger's vest. "Let's find him." The German Shepherd sniffed the boy's shirt, paused, then took off at a determined trot into the woods. They walked for 15 minutes in silence, then 20. Then Ranger stopped cold. He lifted his head, turned sharply left, and ran. Ethan followed, crashing through underbrush, hard hammering. He caught up to Ranger at the edge of a narrow ravine. At the bottom, nestled in a hollow beneath an old oak tree, was the missing boy curled into a ball, eyes wide, lips trembling. Ranger didn't bark. He crawled slowly toward the boy tail, low body relaxed. And the boy, who hadn't responded to a single searcher or family member, reached for him. Ethan radioed it in voice thick with emotion. 10 minutes later, the boy's parents arrived in a panic. The mother collapsed in tears, hugging her son, then looked up at Ethan. "Your dog?" she whispered. He knew exactly where to go. Ethan glanced down at Ranger, who had already laid down next to the boy, watching him like he'd known him forever. "He's been through a lot," Ethan said. "He knows what scared looks like." That night, back at home, they let Ranger sleep in their bed. No arguments, no jokes, just love. Lila climbed in beside him and whispered, "You're still saving people." Months passed. Ranger worked a few more searches, nothing dramatic, nothing headline-worthy, but he never once missed a scent trail. Then one peaceful morning in August, he didn't come when Maya called for breakfast. They found him on the porch, lying in the sunlight, his body still warm, his head resting on his paws, as if he'd simply fallen asleep watching the trees. There was no struggle, no pain, just peace. The vet said it was likely heart failure. Natural, gentle. "He waited," Ethan whispered, brushing the dog's fur one last time, "until he knew we were okay." The town held a memorial 2 weeks later. Children brought flowers. The mayor said a few words. The sheriff's department presented a plaque. But it was Lila who stole the show. She stepped up to the podium, hands shaking, and read aloud from her spiral notebook. "Ranger wasn't just a dog, he was a soldier, a best friend, a hero. He didn't have words, but he spoke to us, and we listened. And we're all here alive because of that." She paused, then added, "I hope everyone here has someone who loves them the way Ranger loved us." There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. At home, the family planted a tree in the backyard and placed a simple stone beneath it. It read, "Ranger loyal always, brave forever, our best boy." Thank you for joining us for the unforgettable story of a ranger, a dog who wasn't just a pet, but a guardian, a healer, and a true American hero. We hope his journey touched your heart as much as it touched ours. We'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment when a dog or any animal seemed to know something you didn't? Something unexplainable, but absolutely real. Share your story in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to Heroes for Animals for more true stories that celebrate the extraordinary bond between humans and the animals who save us. Because sometimes, the greatest heroes walk on four legs.